And welcome everybody to the Geeking Poetic channel. I'm your host, Larry Roberts, and I am here today to talk more about one of my favorite bands and one of my favorite subjects of all time. Yes, it is none other than Kiss. Now, I've been a Kiss fan ever since I was a little bitty kid back in the 1970s. I've turned into an adult collector, we'll say, of all things Kiss, especially Kiss vinyl. That tends to be what I focus on the most on this channel. You may have seen my other videos where I did unboxings of the recent reissues of Hotter Than Hell for the 50th anniversary, as well as Destroyer and Animalize and the Dynasty anniversary release back in May. I'm going to have more of those as those come out, but right now I thought I'd do something kind of different, a little bit fun and a little bit contentious, I'm sure, because what I'm going to do in this episode is I'm going to rank from least to best all of the 1970s studio Kiss albums. So what we're talking about are all of the albums that were purely studio releases from the debut album in February of 1974 all the way through Dynasty that came out in May of 1979. Now you might be wondering, well, how exactly are you going to rank these? What is going to be the specifications for what ranks from least to best? Well, I did set some ground rules for myself. First of all, we are talking only studio albums and full studio albums only. So that does not include side 4 of Kiss Alive 2 with all the studio songs on there. And it doesn't include greatest hits packages such as Double Platinum, or things like the Originals and Originals 2 from Japan. Or for that matter, any of the promo 12-inch records that came out over the years, or 12-inch maxi-singles. No, we're not talking about any of that. We're just going to talk about the complete original studio albums. It also means we are not going to include any live albums. So nope, Kiss Alive will not be on this list. Kiss Alive 2 obviously won't be on this list. None of that qualifies. We're only looking at the proper studio albums. However, that is going to include the 4 1978 solo albums. Now, some people might say, well, those are solo albums. Those aren't really Kiss albums. Well, no, not really. According to the band themselves and all of the history and lore around the 1978 solo albums project, that is supposed to be considered part of the proper Kiss catalog. That's why it still featured the Kiss logo on the cover. They dedicated the records to each other and all that stuff. I am considering those part of the proper catalog. So as such, there will be 11 entries on this list. I am going to look at this not only in terms of just what's my personal favorite. Everybody's got their own favorites, but I'm going to look at things like this, like how often do I still spin the entire album? Or is it an album where I have a few favorite tracks, but the rest of it I could kind of live without? And one more important factor in figuring this out was they might have great songs on these albums, but do I like the versions on this particular record as much or more than the live version? A lot of us do tend to feel that the live versions of some of these songs are far superior to what they put down when they were in the recording studio. And let me just say before we move on here, this is, of course, goes without saying, this is not official, or I certainly don't have a better opinion or a more weighted opinion than anybody else. This is just my personal opinion. And please feel free to leave your comments and let me know what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong, and most importantly, let me know what is your list? How would you rank these records? Because I would love to get that kind of feedback from all of you out there, and I will probably feature it in a follow-up video where I tally up how you ranked these albums. I'm really curious to know how your lists would be compared to mine. So make sure you leave those comments below. And you know what, without any further ado, let's get into the ranking. All right, we're going to count them down from 11 to 1. And let me just say, I love all of these albums. I'm a Kiss fan for life. So none of these albums do I think are bad. But some of them I just like a little bit more. And this one that's coming in at number 11 is unfortunately the one that I listen to the least. And it's probably not a surprise to a lot of people, but it is the Peter Criss solo album. You know, this album gets a lot of hate from fans out there because it is certainly the least Kiss-like of all the solo albums. It's a lot of bluesy, even Motown kind of stuff, some funky stuff, a lot of balladry on here. Not really a huge surprise coming from Peter Criss because he was still writing pretty high on the ballads he had hit the charts with, like Hard Luck Woman and especially Beth. And while Peter was a great rock drummer, he really wasn't a rock guy. So this was his chance to break out and show other sides of him. And I think there's some great stuff on this record, but it's a little sleepy for me. It's not one that I just really find myself in the mood to listen to. Even when I was reviewing all of these records again to make this list and finalize it, I really had a tough time sitting through this whole record. So I think it's mandatory for anybody to have this in their Kiss collection because it's still part of the original 11 albums from the Kiss Studio collection in the 70s. But yeah, this is the one that I take the pass on most of the time. All right, coming in at number 10. Man, already I know this is going to be contentious for a lot of you, but my number 10 favorite album from the 70s Kiss Studio is Love Gun. Now, before you all start hitting that thumbs down button and angrily typing away at me, let me just explain myself a little bit. Yeah, there's some great songs on here. The title track is fantastic. I love stuff like Almost Human, Got Love for Sale. Shock Me, of course, is on here. The first Ace Frehley vocal recorded for a Kiss record. Plaster Caster, I Stole Your Love. I mean, there's a bunch of great songs on this record. Don't get me wrong. However, there are reasons why this one just ranks so low for me. I feel like a lot of the songs that are really great on this record are so much better live. The versions of Love Gun, I Stole Your Love, Shock Me, Tomorrow and Tonight, Christine 16, they're so much more energetic and powerful on a live 2 than they are in the studio. And there's just an overall lack of oomph and heaviness on this record that I think these songs truly deserve. And then there's certain other songs like Then She Kissed Me and Hooligan, which are okay, but I very rarely want to hear those songs. As such, this one comes in pretty low on the list, but again, even low on a Kiss list for me means I still do love it. And moving on to number 9, might be a little bit of a surprise here. I have the 78 solo album from Paul Stanley. I don't find myself sitting down and listening to it from beginning to end so much. There are certain tracks on here that I really, really love. Wouldn't You Like to Know Me, It's All Right, Tonight You Belong to Me, and Move On. Those are 4 great songs that I think could have easily fit into any live Kiss set list, and I know songs like Move On did eventually. But there's other songs on here that, while they are good, like Hold Me, Touch Me, Love in Chains, Take Me Away, Together As One, they're good songs, but they're not ones that I find myself really getting in a mood like, oh, I have to hear Hold Me, Touch Me right now. It ends up being a skip for me a lot of times. I just feel like I would have liked to have seen this be a little bit more adventurous. But that saying, it's still a great record. Bob Kulick's performance on here is excellent. All the players on this record are excellent. Paul is in top form. I would not, have any problem if somebody wanted to put this record on and make me sit there and listen to it from beginning to end. It is a really, really good record. It's just not one that I reach for too often. And yeah, maybe that'll change at some point. But right now, it's just not a priority listen for me. And coming in at number 8, and I know this is going to surprise people because there are some very divided opinions about this record, and people are going to be surprised that I put this higher than the Paul Stanley album. But number 8 for me is the Gene Simmons solo album. Now look, I know a lot of people have issues with this album because they don't like the Disney songs like When You Wish Upon a Star, and some people feel like Mr. Make Believe and See You Tonight are a little bit too soft, or maybe they don't like all of the guest stars that are on here. I know some people also have a problem with this because they feel like it's just too different. We're not really getting much of the demon. This isn't the God of Thunder on this album. This doesn't have an Almost Human or a War Machine or something like that. We really don't get to see that side of Gene. And for me personally, I am 100% okay with that, because as much as I love the heavy demon side of Gene, I think he has so much more to offer in other areas. I'm a big fan of 60s rock. I love, the Brit pop stuff from the 60s, and so does Gene, and it really shows on this record. And I think that this is what I want. If a guy from Kiss is going to go and do something that's still rocks but is a little bit different and shows another side, this is it for me. I've loved this record ever since I was a kid. Radioactive, See You Tonight, Living in Sin, Always Near You, Nowhere to Hide is one of my favorite songs of all time. Yeah, it's pretty far removed from Calling Dr. Love. I get it. It may not be the most Kiss-like record on the list, but I think it's a really underrated album. And so for me, this one comes in at number 8. Again, make sure you let me know what you think, because I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me about this one, but I think this one deserves a little bit more of a chance. So let me know. And coming in at number 7, this one might really be a surprise for a lot of people. Number 7 for me is the debut album, Kiss. I know there's a lot of people right now that are like, dude, how can you put that album so far down the list at number 7? It's got all of the Kiss classics on it. And you're not wrong. I mean, think about it. This is an album that has Strutter, Deuce, Firehouse, Nothing to Lose, Black Diamond, Cold Gin, 100,000 Years. I mean, there's some of the songs that Kiss played right up until the very end. Just their standard songs. But this is a lot like what I was saying about Love Gun, and probably even more so. As much as I like this record, and I do still spin this one from beginning to end now and then, I just find myself really, really wanting to hear the live versions of it. The live version of Strutter, the live version of Deuce, the live version of Black Diamond. Come on, anybody knows that those versions that are on an album like Alive are, I think most Kiss fans are going to probably agree with me, they are far superior to the more kind of tame, slower tempo, sterile production versions that are on the studio album. I mean, that's the whole reason they ended up making Kiss Alive in the first place, was because fans were not satisfied with what they were hearing on the studio albums. They liked the songs, they didn't like the production value and just the whole atmosphere of it. Only too often when I want to hear all the songs on here, I go for the live versions. I listen to Kiss Alive, I listen to the other live compilations and bootlegs and things like that. I just don't spin this record that much. That being said, what a record it is, given the amount of material these guys put on here and how quality it was. I'll always love it. It's just not a regular spin for me anymore. And moving on to number 6, it's another controversial one. Not even maybe so much just because of where I've got it on the list, but just because I know from some of the recent videos I've put out and the feedback I got how divided the community is about this album. Some think it's great, some think it is terrible and it was the beginning of the end. I'm of course talking about 1979's Dynasty. Now again, yeah, we know this is the one that so many people say, well, this was the disco album. This was the start of their disco period. I don't really buy into that. Yeah, I Was Made for Lovin' You was like a pseudo rock disco. I mean, they were trying to capitalize on the disco wave that was happening at the time. And songs like Dirty Livin' definitely has a funky disco Studio 54 vibe to it. But the rest of the record does not at all. You can't tell me that songs like Magic Touch, X-Ray Eyes, certainly any of the Ace Frehley songs, none of that have any disco in there at all. I think they're just great late 70s poppy rock songs, and I think it's some of the best stuff they did for that period. Clearly, I ranked this a lot higher than Love Gun, and I know that's going to rankle a lot of fans out there. But to me, this is one of those records that we start getting into this part of the list where, yeah, I spin this from beginning to end pretty often. Now, why did it only make number 6? Well, aside from that, I just think there's overall stronger albums from these guys. It's the kind of record where if I don't hear I Was Made for Loving You or even Dirty Livin' again, I'm kind of okay with that. I've heard those songs enough times in my life, and I don't mind the disco aspect to it. It's novel and it's fun, but I'm just kind of burned out on that stuff. Side 2 of this album, I will spin over and over and over again, from Charisma through Save Your Love. And I think songs like Sure Know Something, man, what an underrated Paul Stanley gem that is. Great song. Although I really like the version from Kiss Unplugged. I might even like it a little better than the studio version. But anyway, I think this is a great album. I know a lot of you have told me you hate this album, but a lot of you also told me that you really liked this album, and I understand why some people hate it, but I lean towards the love it, and it's kind of right in the middle of my list as such. So there you go, number 6. And coming in at number 5 on my ranking list of least to best Kiss studio albums from the 70s. Yep, it's one we just talked about recently. It is 1974's Hotter Than Hell. So, being honest with you here, this was a really, really tough one for me to figure out how I wanted to rank it. This was the most difficult one on the whole list. And the reason being is that I love this album so much. It is definitely one that fits the criteria of, will I spin it from beginning to end? Yes, I will. Will I not skip any tracks? Absolutely, no skips. Do I think there are just great classic songs on here? Yes. This is a great blend of classics like Hotter Than Hell, Let Me Go Rock and Roll, Parasite, Going Blind, and then there's deeper tracks like All the Way, Coming Home, Mainline, Strange Ways. Come on, it's got Strange Ways on here, folks. That's a great heavy Kiss tune. All the songs on this record are fantastic, but I can't deny the fact that the production on this album sucks. And it just does. Now, I know there's a lot of people, and I'm kind of one of those people too, that says, oh, but Hotter Than Hell, yeah, it's got a really shitty production on there, but it's kind of part of the charm, and we've gotten used to it. And recently, that's kind of changed a little bit, because some of you might know that the Frankenstein Creations channel by Ken Nardi of Anacrusis, he did a whole reimagining of this album where he used AI and some other tricks to be able to do a rethinking, a representing of this album with a cleaned up sound, better guitar sound, much better drum sound, bass is booming. And when I heard the album remixed like that, yeah, there's some things he took some license with that I prefer the original, but hearing it so cleaned up like that and hearing how powerful this album could be, it does kind of change my opinion of this record a little bit. It's hard after hearing that, going back and listening to this crusty production on this album and being quite as content with it as I used to be. So this is pretty much what I'm stuck with. If this album had a better production, I think this would rank even higher on the list for me. It would probably be in my top 3, but because it's a little hard to get past some of its faults, it sits there towards the middle at number 5. All right, coming in at number 4, I'm sure many of you are curious about where this album was going to rank on my list, because this is a fan favorite for so many of us. I was not done talking about the 78 solo albums. Nope, not at all. Of course, it's the Ace Frehley solo album. I mean, what a masterpiece of an album this is. Now, admittedly, these days, I probably spin the Gene Simmons album or even the Paul Stanley album more frequently than I spin this one, only because I've listened to this album so much over the years. I know every note and nook and cranny of this thing. I've probably listened to this album 4,000 times or something like that. I just love this album. So I do get a little burned out on it from time to time because I played it so much, but it's still a perfect spin. There are no bad songs on this record, from starting off with Rip It Out and ending with the incredible Fractured Mirror. It's just an incredible trip to take from beginning to end. Ace is on fire on this album. Anton Fig's drumming is incredible. You've got guys like Will Lee appearing on here. Eddie Kramer's production, they just hit every beat perfectly. And it's a damn near perfect album. You know, Ace's vocals are, you either love it or you hate it. You take it for what it is. I think Ace's vocals on this record are great. They're perfect for the material that's on here. It's such an influential album. I mean, how many people started wanting to play guitar just because of this album? I know I'm one of them. So it had to go up there way high. Yeah, like I said, I might listen to some of the other records a little more often nowadays just because I listen to it so much, but I will never object to somebody putting this on the turntable and saying, let's spin the Ace Frehley 78 solo album. I am always up to listen to this thing. It is great, pure, perfect rock. All right, now we are in the top 3. What records are going to be 1, 2, and 3? Well, for me, number 3 is 1976's Destroyer album. Again, this tends to be one that nowadays especially, I see a lot of Kiss fans being really divided on. I mean, this is considered one of the essential albums, not only of Kiss, but it's like one of the essential albums of just rock history. And with good reason. I mean, come on, this album was a game changer. They brought in Bob Ezrin. They had a whole next level kind of production. Their songwriting went to the next level with things like Detroit Rock City, Flamin' Youth, God of Thunder, Shout It Out Loud, of course, Beth, and new epic heights that they reached with songs like Great Expectations, Do You Love Me, King of the Nighttime World. There's a lot of great songs on this record, but again, I do tend to, with some of the songs, I tend to prefer the live versions that I've heard on other albums like Kiss Alive 2 or even Kiss Alive 3. But even though I tend to prefer some of those live versions, I can't deny how great this record sounds. I mean, there is a lot of power in the recorded versions of songs like Detroit Rock City and God of Thunder. I mean, yeah, this is a great Kiss album and you really can't go wrong with it, but it just is at times a little too polished and a little bit too different to me from what really makes Kiss a great, gnarly rock and roll band. But that being said, when I am in the mood for it, I love listening to this album from beginning to end. It's a great one. I know this is a favorite. I know a lot of Kiss fans consider this to be their favorite Kiss album. I don't argue with that at all. I could totally understand why this ends up being number 1 on a lot of people's lists, but for me, it's up there, but it ain't number 1. All right, we're down to the last 2, and I gotta give a disclaimer here. For me, 1 and 2 on this list, they're almost both number 1 for me. I listen to them about equally as much. I love them about equally as much. It was really, really hard figuring out what was going to be in the top spot. And I had to get really technical with myself about it. And I came up with what I did. And here it is. Number 2 for me, from March of 1975, we have the 3rd album in the discography. It is Dress to Kill. This is one of those albums that not only do I play it from beginning to end, not only do I have no skips on this record, but I listen to this album a lot. Even though I've had this record since like 1977 or something like that when I was a kid, I still spin this whole album all the time. I probably listen to something from this album, if not the entire album, multiple times a month. I think this is just a great rock and roll album. It's got some of my favorite Kiss songs on there. Room Service, Two-Timer, Ladies in Waiting, Getaway, and Rock Bottom. That's just side 1. Every one of those songs to me is a rock and roll classic. not a skip to be found on the record. I love every song on here. I have a strong sentimental attachment to it because it was one of my first Kiss records I ever got, and I have to admit that does factor into it. So why didn't it make it number one? Well, as much as I like the production, actually, you know what? Never mind. I love the production on this record. I do have to admit that it leans more towards the radio rock friendly sound, and it's not quite as big and bombastic as I think a really rockin' Kiss album probably deserves. But even so, that being said, the versions that are on here, I do love the studio versions. I love the artwork. It's ironic that one of the most simple of Kiss album covers, with just this black and white shot of them wearing suits on a New York street corner with a reverse image version on the back, that this was just so striking to me as a kid. I just found myself captivated by this. And for some reason, it totally suits the material on the record. This feels like a very New York rock band kind of record from the mid-70s. It's great. I could go on and on about it. I'll save that for another video. But yeah, this one, if it wasn't for a couple of teensy little things, this one could have been number one. Yes, coming in at the top of the list, the number one Kiss studio album from the 70s era. For me, it's gotta be Rock and Roll Over. First of all, there's the obvious visual stuff. Look at that cover. That cover's fantastic. And in addition to this cover, man, I remember when I got this as a kid, I was captivated by the front of it, but then I opened the package and it came with this great sticker of the cover and an order form that I could order all sorts of stuff and join the Kiss Army. This was just, for me, the pinnacle of classic Kiss. This really ticked all the boxes for me as a kid. And of course, aside from all the looks and the cool little additional things they put in here, the music itself, what a great album. This has so many classics on there. Making Love, I Want You, Love 'Em and Leave 'Em, Mr. Speed, Ladies Room, Calling Dr. Love, just to name some of the songs on this record. And here's the thing, as much as I do love the live versions of some of these songs, I love the studio versions. Bringing Eddie Kramer back into the fold and having him produce this, and the way they recorded this in that theater to give it just more of a big, energized rock sound that they had been lacking on their previous studio albums, was the right choice. This is absolutely the studio album that I recommend before any of them, even before Dressed to Kill. This is the album that I recommend people check out if they're just getting into it, or maybe they've never heard a full Kiss album before. This is the one. This, to me, represents 70s Kiss at its finest. Ace is on fire. Peter's drumming is really never better than what's on here. This is when Kiss just hit the bullseye right in the middle of the dartboard. This is the album that, for me, has it all when it comes to a Kiss studio album from the 70s. And so that does it for my list, my countdown ranking from my least favorite to my most favorite, because they're all favorites, let's be honest. Let me know, what did you think of my list? I'm sure some of you are going to have some very strong opinions about it. I encourage you to let me know, what's your favorite? What are your favorite songs off these records? What's your favorite records? Do you have an all-time favorite Kiss album, even if it's not the 70s ones, but although I think for many of you it's going to be a 70s one, because we all have a very soft spot for that era of Kiss with the original lineup. That being said, this is not the last I'm going to talk about the Kiss studio vinyl output. I'm going to talk in the next video about ranking what I consider to be the least good to the most good 1980s studio albums. I'm going to do that. That's what I'm going to tackle in the next video. We're going to start off with 1980 with Unmasked and go all the way through to 1989's Hot in the Shade. And the 80s, it gets a little bit more contentious and a little more complicated trying to rank them. So that's going to be a really fun one. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so that you're notified when new content comes out from us. And make sure you share, especially if you got any other friends that are into this stuff like we are. share it with them. I want to hear from them too. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to talking with you all again. So until then, see you, everybody.